The lock should not have clicked red, but it did. A flat mechanical beep, a thin red flash, and the access panel on the gate to my grandma's beachfront condo rejected my badge, as if I were a stranger. I stood there with my suitcase handle still in my hand, the ocean wind pushing my hair across my face, and felt something cold settle under my ribs. I had been gone for 6 weeks, not 6 months, not 6 years. 6 weeks. Long enough to rack up jet lag and a few new stamps in my passport, not long enough for a life to come apart. Or so I thought. I tried the badge again. Same cold red blink, same denial. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the sheer absurdity knocked the breath out of my lungs. For years, that badge had let me come and go without a second glance. That condo was the one place I trusted to be stable, safe, predictable. It was the kind of place retirees dreamed of, a quiet stretch outside Charleston where the sand was white. The neighbors waved politely, and security guards took their job seriously. I bought it for my grandma so she could spend her last years listening to the waves, instead of the hum of a refrigerator in some assisted living facility. And now the gate was acting like I did not exist. Before I keep going, let me pause for a moment, because I always wonder about things like this. Whenever people listen to stories like mine, I find myself imagining where they are, what they are doing. When all of this happened, I was standing at the gate of that condo community with the wind cutting through my heads, jacket and the taste of airplane coffee still bitter on my tongue. I hit the call button on the security kiosk. A guard stepped out of the small glass office, squinting at me like I had interrupted a nap he did not want to admit taking. He had that slow stride of someone who never rushes unless the building is on fire. I held up my badge. Something is wrong with the system. It is saying my access is denied. He took it, scanned it on his handheld device, and waited. Then his brows dipped. Interesting. Looks like this badge is revoked. Not expired, revoked. He said it the way a doctor might say the word malignant. Calm, factual, final enough to chill the rest of your day. I pulled out my driver's license and handed it to him. Isla Benson. Unit.406. My grandma lives here. She has for years. He scanned my ID, then checked something on the screen inside his booth. His mouth tightened. I am sorry, ma'am. That unit changed ownership 3 weeks ago. The resident of record is no longer your grandmother. No longer your grandmother. As if she had ceased being a person overnight. I blinked hard, because for a second I wondered if I had heard him wrong. My brain simply refused to process the combination of words he just used. You must have the wrong unit. No, ma'am. 406. Ownership transferred. Your access rights were removed at the same time. The wind hit me again, colder this time. I felt the familiar instinct rise, the one I use in meetings when a deal goes sideways. Breathe. Assess. Do not react emotionally. My profession has trained me to evaluate numbers, patterns, people, motives. Shock is just another variable if you look at it the right way. Can you tell me who the new owner is? He shook his head. Privacy policy, of course. Privacy. The word I suddenly hated. I pulled out my phone and dialed my grandma. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Her voice was on the greeting. Soft, sweet, recorded on a day when the world still made sense. I ended the call and tried again. Same result. I swallowed and called my dad. Straight to voicemail. I tried my mom. Nothing. A small warning bell chimed somewhere behind my sternum. My family never agrees on anything, but apparently they all agreed not to pick up the phone today. I turned back to the guard. Can you at least confirm she moved out voluntarily, or whether she left a forwarding address? He shook his head again with the same bland expression. Ma'am, all I can say is she is no longer listed as a resident. That is all our system allows. The impulse to argue rose in my throat, but I tamped it down. This was not the man who changed ownership. He was just the messenger, with a polyester uniform and a laminated badge that said, Travis. I thanked him out of habit, even though gratitude felt like the wrong currency. Then I rolled my suitcase back to the car, the wheels bumping along the concrete as if they had objections of their own. The moment I sat inside and shut the door, a strange stillness dropped over me. My hand stayed steady. That surprised me. I have been rattled before. Broken hearts, bad news, canceled contracts, flights that landed 2 hours late in the wrong city. But this was different. This was the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, the kind nature uses to warn you that your life is about to divide itself into before and after. I tried my grandma again. Voicemail. I tried my dad once more. Nothing. I tried my mom. Nothing. It was like dialing into a dead frequency. For a woman who had grown a whole business on controlling variables, this was the sort of uncertainty that made your scalp prickle. I stared through the windshield at the gate still closed behind me. It looked almost smug. 6 weeks. That was all. 6 ordinary weeks, during which I sent pictures to my grandma of airport lounges, sunsets over hotel pools, a latte shaped like a leaf in a tiny cafe in Copenhagen. She always replied with a heart or a little note telling me she loved the view. Not once did she hint that anything was wrong. She was not the type to keep a crisis to herself. If she had so much as twisted an ankle, she would have told me with 3 exclamation marks. So where was she? I sat there long enough for a minivan to drive past, and a couple, in tennis shoes, to speed walk by with tiny dogs wearing matching sweaters. Life kept moving, as if I were not sitting inside a car trying to make sense of a reality that did not line up with anything I believed. I closed my eyes and let my head fall back against the seat. Somewhere in my memory, a small image surfaced. Me at 8, sitting on my grandma's lap on the porch of her old house in Asheville, while she taught me how to peel apples in one long spiral. She said that life only feels messy when you stare too close. Step back, and sometimes the pattern shows itself. It was one of those lessons that did not sink in until adulthood. Apparently, it still needed work. When I opened my eyes again, the sun had slipped lower. I took one more breath, picked up my phone, and started calling every place I could think of. Hospitals, shelters, friends of hers. Anyone who might have seen a 76-year-old woman with silver hair and a habit of thanking strangers for holding the door. Most calls went nowhere. A few promised to check. No one had answers. The truth was simple and awful. I had no idea where my grandma was, and I could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The condo, the revoked access, the silence from my parents. The lack of any notice from my grandma herself. The variables lined up in a pattern I did not want to recognize yet. I started the car. The sky was turning the color of a bruise, soft purple fading into blue. I headed toward downtown Charleston with my jaw tight and my thoughts doing the quiet, dangerous kind of math. Don't panic. Something colder. Something measured. I still did not know it then, but that gate refusing to open was not the worst part. It was just the first crack in a story that would unravel everything I believed about family, loyalty, and the price of looking away. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. But I felt it in my shoulders, a kind of heavy awareness settling in the way humidity settles before a storm. I kept driving with one hand on the wheel and the other tapping through contact, lists that suddenly felt too short. The road signs blurred past as I crossed the bridge toward downtown Charleston, the water below dark and flat like it was holding its breath. The first call was to the non-emergency line for the Charleston Police Department. I explained that my grandma was missing, that her residence information had changed without warning, that her phone was going straight to voicemail. The dispatcher listened with the calm cadence of someone who has heard every version of panic, then asked all the standard questions. Age, appearance, any health conditions? When I had last spoken to her, whether she had ever wandered off before. I answered everything mechanically. 76. Silver hair. 5'2". No, never. She was steady, grounded, a creature of routine. Her disappearance was like gravity shutting off for the day. We will put out an alert to local hospitals and shelters. If she is located, you will be contacted, the dispatcher said. I thanked her, though the words came out rough, and hung up. Next were the hospitals. I moved through them in order, starting with the closest to the condo. Charleston Medical. Roper St. Francis. Trident. Each receptionist checked their system. Each told me no, she was not there. I called a few shelters, a few memory care facilities. Nothing. Somewhere between my 6th and 7th call, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, parked under a flickering light, and let the engine idle. The hum of it steadied me enough to keep going. I called again. and again. Enough times that the voice of one nurse began to feel familiar, like we were co-workers sharing a long shift. It was close to 10 in the evening when my phone finally rang with a number I did not recognize. My stomach tightened. I answered, and a man's voice introduced himself as an officer with the Charleston police. "We think we may have your grandmother," he said. "She was brought in by a patrol unit earlier this evening. She appears disoriented and dehydrated." I wrote down the address, pushed the car into drive, and took off so quickly the grocery cart corral rattled in my rearview mirror. The roads were mostly empty. The stoplights felt too slow. My fingers kept drumming against the steering wheel in a rhythm that did not match. The radio. I kept hearing the security guard's voice. "She is no longer listed as a resident." The facility was a small shelter on the edge of town, next to a church and across from an asphalt lot cracked by tree roots. The entrance was lit by a single buzzing bulb that washed everything in a tired, yellow glow. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and something metallic. I walked up to the intake desk, gave my name, and waited while the woman behind the counter checked a clipboard. "She is in room 3, she said. A volunteer is sitting with her." Room 3 was down a short hallway. I could hear a soft voice humming from inside, not my grandma's. When I stepped through the doorway, the humming stopped. A woman in a blue vest stood up from a chair near the bed and gave me a tired smile. "I think this is who you are looking for." My grandma lay on the narrow bed under a thin blanket. Her hair, usually brushed smooth, was tangled. Her cheeks were flushed an unhealthy shade of red. Sweat dampened the collar of her shirt. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was fast and shallow. There was a paper cup of water on the bedside table and a pair of cheap rubber sandals on the floor. The kind shelters keep in bulk. For a moment, I could not move. I had been raised by this woman. She taught me how to tie my shoes, how to make scrambled eggs fluffy, how to balance a checkbook, and how to recognize when someone was taking advantage of my kindness. And here she was, looking like a neglected patient abandoned in a hallway. I stepped closer. Grandma. Her eyelids fluttered. Then she opened her eyes and focused on me with difficulty, like I was a memory just out of reach. She tried to smile, the way she always did when she saw me, but it came out crooked. "Isla, honey, you are here." I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. It was hot. Too hot. Her skin felt fragile, like parchment left in the sun. "What happened? Where have you been?" Her breath hitched. "Oh, sweetheart. I tried to call you. Someone took my phone. I think it fell." The volunteer gave me a sympathetic nod and quietly stepped out so we could have privacy. A nurse came in a few minutes later, a tall man with tired eyes and a clipboard tucked under his arm. He introduced himself, glanced at the monitors, and told me her temperature was just over 102. She was dehydrated, weak, likely had not eaten in at least a day. Then he said something that made the room tilt a little. There were traces of a sedative in her blood work. A small amount, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to impair judgment. I stared at him, the words refusing to fit into any framework of reality I recognized. "She does not take sedatives. She has never been prescribed anything like that." "I know," he said gently. "Sometimes it happens by accident. Someone gives an elderly person the wrong medication. Sometimes it is intentional." He paused. "Do you know anyone who might have given her something?" I shook my head slowly. No, at least I did not think so. But the truth was, I did not know what to think. After he left, I helped my grandma sit up enough to sip some water from the paper cup. Each swallow made her wince as if her throat hurt. She apologized between breaths. "I did not mean to scare you. I tried to get home. I sat by the boardwalk for a long time. Then it got dark and I got tired. And then the police were asking me questions." Her voice drifted in and out. There were gaps. Holes, places where her memory should have connected but did not. And I tried to piece together the sequence on my own, building a timeline out of fragments. At one point she reached for me, her grip weak but steady enough to anchor me. "I missed you so much." I rested my forehead gently against her hand. "I missed you too. And I am here now." We stayed like that for a while, my hand around hers, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. Exhaustion crept across her features until her eyes closed again. Her breathing evened out, softer this time. She fell asleep holding my fingers, as if letting go might send her drifting somewhere I could not find her. When she was resting, I stepped out into the hallway. A vending machine hummed near the wall. Someone was coughing in a distant room. I went to the small waiting area, dropped into one of the plastic chairs, and let my bag fall at my feet. I stared at the floor tiles, pale squares framed by darker grout lines, like a grid meant for sorting chaos. My mind kept looping back to the same sequence: revoked access, new ownership, no contact. Her missing, the sedative. None of it made sense, and yet all of it made too much sense when lined up next to my parents' silence. My hands finally started to shake. Not much, just enough that the tips of my fingers trembled as I pressed them together. I clasped them in my lap to steady them. A person who spends her life analyzing risk learns to ignore her emotions until the facts line up. Tonight, the facts refused to stay still. They flickered like a faulty light bulb. Something had happened to my grandma, something no one had warned me about, something no one had admitted. And now she was lying in a shelter bed with a fever, no phone, no money, no explanation. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the night staff to change shifts, long enough for the nurse to give me a quiet nod as he walked past, long enough for my thoughts to shift from fear into something colder and more structured, a kind of calculation. A kind of pattern forming behind my eyes. I folded my arms tight across my chest, listening to the distant sounds of the building. I had returned from a 6-week trip expecting normalcy. Instead, I had walked into a void shaped exactly like the person who raised me. And as I sat alone in that hard plastic chair, the pieces arranging themselves into a picture I did not want to see, but could not look away from. And by the time the hallway quieted again, my grandma's nurse told me she was awake and asking for me. I stood, stretched the stiffness from my back, and walked toward room 3 with a strange, cold clarity settling behind my ribs. I was not ready for answers, but answers were coming anyway. She looked better than she had earlier, though not by much. Her fever had eased a little. Her eyes tracked me more clearly, and when I sat beside her, she reached for my hand with a weak sort of urgency. "You found me," she whispered, as if she were worried the whole thing had been a dream. I squeezed her fingers gently and told her of course I did. I always would. Then I took a slow breath, bracing myself. "Grandma, I need you to tell me what happened." She looked toward the window. It was dark outside, the kind of thick coastal darkness that absorbs light instead of reflecting it. I could see her thinking, trying to pull the memory out of whatever fog the sedative had left behind. She swallowed, then began. "They came to the condo, honey, your dad and your mom. They told the security girl at the gate they were my family, so she let them in." I sat very still. My parents had not visited that condo in years. They always made excuses. Too far, too busy, too inconvenient. Hearing they had shown up while I was gone made something tighten in my chest. My grandma continued. "Your dad said they were there to help me with some paperwork, something about updating records while you were away. He said you told him to come, that you wanted things ready when you got back." I did not interrupt her. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, steady and heavy like a metronome. "He handed me some papers," she said. "He said I just needed to sign them so nothing would get delayed. He said it was all routine." I asked what it was for, and he said it was just a formality. I trusted him. I know I should have read them more carefully, but my eyes are not what they used to be, and I did not want to seem difficult. She looked down at her hands, ashamed in a way that made my throat tighten. Then she told me about the orange juice. "Your mom handed it to me. She smiled and told me it would help me feel less tired. I thought nothing of it. It tasted strange, but I drank it because she was being so kind." Kind. The word hit me harder than anything else. Kindness used like bait. My grandma hesitated. After that, everything got fuzzy. They said they were taking me to see the sunrise at the beach. I remember getting into the car. I remember feeling sleepy, too sleepy. I tried to tell them something felt wrong, but I could not get the words out. And then I woke up on a bench by the dunes, and they were gone. My throat tightened. "How long were you alone?" She shook her head. "I do not know. It was late when the police found me." I felt something cold uncoil inside me. Not panic, not grief. Something sharper. Something that felt very much like the beginning of fury, but controlled, measured, like water under ice. I kept my voice calm because she needed calm. "Grandma, did they take your phone?" She nodded slightly. And my keys, sweetheart. I could not get into the condo even if I found my way back. Her words clicked into place with the security guards. Revoked access. New ownership. Everything lining up with mechanical precision. Like a spreadsheet I did not want to reconcile, but could no longer ignore. I helped her sip more water, adjusted her blanket, and stayed with her until her eyes grew heavy again. When she fell asleep, still holding the edge of my sleeve like a child afraid of the dark, I knew exactly what I had to do. I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my phone. I did not rehearse what to say. I did not need to. The question had already formed, clear and sharp as glass. I called my dad first. The line rang 3 times, then clicked. He answered, sounding irritated, like I had interrupted something more important than the blood in my veins. What, Isla? I kept my voice steady. Why did you leave her? There was a pause, a long one. The kind where people choose between truth and convenience. Then he let out a breath that sounded like annoyance. She wandered off. We are not responsible for that. My fingers tightened around the phone. You drugged her. You took her phone. You took her keys. You abandoned her on a beach. Why? His tone sharpened. Watch your mouth, young lady. You have no idea what you are talking about. My mom's voice chimed in faintly in the background. Put it on speaker. Let her hear me. Then my dad's breath moved across the microphone, and suddenly both their voices were there, mingled, defensive, brittle in the way only guilt makes brittle. Your grandmother is fine, my mom said. Stop being dramatic. This is exactly why we had to step in. You are never home. You left her there alone. She was not alone. I bought her that condo so she could live safely, so she could have peace. It was the only thing she ever wanted. My dad snorted at that. That condo was too much for an old woman. She did not need it. We did. There it was, the slip, the truth. My pulse steadied in a way that almost frightened me with its clarity. What did you do? I asked, each word deliberate. Did you sell it? Another pause, a quieter one. Then my dad's voice, flat, unapologetic. It is our inheritance anyway. We are just taking it early. The words were so blunt, so casually cruel, that for a second I wondered if I had hallucinated them. My mom added, You have plenty. You travel the world. You will be fine. We needed the money more. I did not raise my voice. I did not curse or shout. I simply felt the last thin threads of assumption snapping one by one. They had not even asked if she was alive. Not once since answering the call. They had not said her name. All they cared about was the condo, the money, their entitlement. Their justification is wrapped in cheap logic. My voice came out quiet and cold, the kind of cold that settles inside you when you finally stop pretending. She could have died. Do you understand that? My mom scoffed. Well, she did not. So stop being dramatic and fix it, Isla. Call the condo people. Undo whatever needs undoing. You are the one with the connections. You can make this go away. The expectation in her tone was so casual, so confident, it almost made me laugh again. The same humorless laugh I had felt at the gate. They genuinely believed I would clean up after them, that I would smooth everything out, call the lawyers, call the banks, make the crime evaporate, because ruining a life was inconvenient for them. When I finally spoke, the words surprised even me with how steady they were. I am not fixing anything for you. I am not covering anything up. You did this. You deal with it. My dad snapped something about ungrateful children. My mom started on how much they had sacrificed. I did not wait for the rest. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call mid-sentence. The silence that followed was cleaner than anything they had said. I stayed in the hallway for a few breaths, letting that silence settle. No shaking, no tears, just a tightness in my chest, like a door had closed and locked behind me for good. Whatever remained of the person I used to be around them, the girl who tried to keep the peace, who smoothed arguments and made excuses, she had finally gone quiet. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked slowly to the window at the far end of the hall. The night was still dark, the street outside empty, except for a single streetlight flickering over the cracked pavement. I watched it pulse, that flawed rhythm, like a warning or a countdown. Behind me, my grandma slept in room 3. her breathing soft and uneven. Ahead of me was a truth I could no longer unsee. My parents had not acted out of confusion or desperation. They had acted with intention, calculation. They had treated my grandma like an obstacle instead of a human being, a possession, a thing they believed they had the right to rearrange or discard. And as I stood there with the hum of the hallway filling my ears, I felt something shift inside me. Not a snap, not a break, more like a hinge turning, setting a new direction. A slow, deliberate pivot. I turned back toward room 3, toward the woman who raised me, toward the one person in the world who had never asked for anything except honesty. My footsteps were soft against the floor, steady, unshaken. I knew what needed to happen next. I knew exactly which path had opened. And for the first time since landing back in Charleston, I felt something close to certainty taking shape, sharp and cold, ready for what came after. I knew exactly which path had opened, but knowing did not make the next morning any easier. I barely slept in the chair beside my grandma's bed. Every time she shifted or sighed, my eyes snapped open. Around 6 a.m, a nurse stepped in with a gentle smile and told me they wanted to run a few more tests. I let them take her, then sat alone staring at the empty bed, feeling a knot of responsibility tighten between my ribs. When she returned, she looked a little more awake. Her fever had dropped a degree. Her cheeks were less flushed. She took a few sips of water without wincing. It was progress. Tiny, but real. I sat next to her as she adjusted her blanket and tried to smooth her hair, embarrassed that it was still tangled. "You look beautiful," I said quietly. She shook her head, but her eyes softened. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder the nurse had given me earlier. It held the documents that had been found tucked into her sweater pocket when she arrived. Crumpled pages, bent corners, smudged ink. Papers she had signed without truly understanding what they meant. "Grandma, I need to ask you about these." She looked down at them as if seeing them for the first time, though I knew she had seen them before, just not through clear eyes. "My handwriting is all over the place," she whispered. "I should not have signed anything. My eyes are too weak these days." I touched the back of her hand. "You trusted them. That is not your fault." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, and she blinked quickly like she was trying not to cry. I unfolded the top sheet. It was a property transfer document granting full authority over the condo to my dad and mom. Their signatures were neat, deliberate. Hers was shaky, almost illegible. The date was stamped 3 weeks earlier, the same day my badge had been revoked. The next page showed a temporary power of attorney, not legally airtight, but enough for someone unscrupulous to use as leverage. They had timed everything perfectly while I was overseas. I handed each page back to her gently. "Why did you sign these?" She pressed her lips together, choosing her words with care. "Your dad said it was important. He said you asked him to take care of it because you were busy. He said it was for your protection and mine, that it would help pay bills while you were traveling." I believed him. He is my son. She shook her head. "He used to be such a sweet boy." The weight of her words settled into my chest like wet sand. I had left her unprotected. Not physically, not emotionally, but legally. I had assumed no one would ever prey on her. I had believed my absence was temporary and harmless. I was wrong. My intentions had not been enough. I took a breath and forced myself to stay in the present. There would be time later for self-blame. Right now, she needs stability, not guilt. "Grandma, did you understand what the papers said?" She looked down at her hands. "Not really." But I did not want to disappoint him. He made it sound simple. My vision is so bad these days. The print was too small, and I was tired. She hesitated. And the orange juice made me more tired. It made my head feel heavy. Her words lit a flicker of heat at the base of my spine. I kept my expression steady, but inside, another piece of the puzzle slid into place. She had not just been manipulated. She had been impaired. After she rested again, I stepped out to the nurse's station and asked for copies of everything. One of the nurses, a woman with short hair and a no-nonsense tone, handed me a small stack and said if I needed further documentation regarding her condition, they would provide it. I thanked her and sat in the waiting area flipping through the pages. Every line of each document felt like a violation, a theft of dignity disguised as bureaucracy. It was clear I needed legal guidance. I could not rely on assumptions. This was beyond a family dispute. I Googled elder law attorneys in Charleston and found a firm 10 minutes from their hospital. The earliest appointment they had was at 10 o'clock. I booked it. By the time they called my grandma for her next round of fluids, I told her I would be leaving briefly to talk to someone who could help. She nodded, though worry flickered across her face. "Will you come back before lunch?" Her voice was so small. "Of course." "I am not going anywhere," I said. "You are safe. I promise." The law office was in an old converted house painted pale blue with a wraparound, porch and white columns. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. A receptionist directed me to a small conference room. A few minutes later, a woman in her 50s walked in with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She introduced herself as Attorney Marlene Gray. She offered a firm handshake, then sat across from me with a warm but focused expression. "Tell me what is happening." Her tone reminded me of a surgeon before an operation. Calm. Methodical. Seriously, I laid out the sequence of events as clearly as I could. The revoked badge, the missing grandma, the shelter, the fever, the sedative, the paperwork, my parents' phone call. As I spoke, she took notes quickly and efficiently. Her pen moved like someone familiar with complicated stories and broken families. When I finished, she looked at the documents I brought and her brows tightened. She tapped the power of attorney first. "This is invalid for anything beyond basic tasks. It is not durable. It is not notarized correctly." And she signed under suspicious circumstances, which makes it challengeable. Then she lifted the property transfer page, scanned it, and let out a slow, controlled breath. "This is concerning. The signature looks compromised, and the timing, combined with her medical condition, suggests she lacked the capacity to consent." She paused, choosing her words with care. "What you are describing fits several warning signs of elder financial abuse." The phrase hit me harder than I expected, even though I already knew it deep down. Hearing someone else say it, someone trained in the law, made it real. I asked what the next steps should be. She leaned back in her chair. "First, we report this formally, both to the police and to Adult Protective Services. Second, we challenge the transfer of ownership. Third, we pursue an injunction to prevent your parents from contacting or accessing your grandmother. Fourth, we determine whether to pursue civil or criminal charges or both." A part of me flinched at the word criminal. It felt extreme. But another part of me, the one that had seen my grandma feverish in a shelter bed, knew that my reluctance was a luxury she no longer had. Attorney Gray flipped one more page and looked at me over the edge of her glasses. "I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for this to become a legal battle? It will not resolve quickly. Your parents may retaliate. It will get messy." I met her eyes. I had spent years avoiding messes. Years keeping peace at my own expense. Years letting my dad and mom dictate the emotional weather in every room we shared. That version of me had walked into a shelter last night and seen something she would never forget. I took a breath and answered, "Yes, I am prepared." She nodded once, sharply. "Then we begin." We spent the next hour reviewing details. Every call, every timestamp, every piece of paper. She explained that sedation, even mild, could constitute undue influence. That elderly individuals signing complex documents without explanation is a known red flag. That abandonment is taken seriously, especially if medical harm results. With each explanation, the knot in my chest loosened slightly, not because this would be easy, but because someone finally understood the magnitude of what had happened. Someone could name it with precision instead of excuses. By the time I stepped back into my car, the late morning sun reflected off the windshield in a glare that made my eyes water. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and exhaled slowly. I expected to feel anger, but what filled me instead was a strange sense of resolve, a structured calm, the kind that settles in once you stop hoping bad people will choose to do better. I went back to the hospital. My grandma was awake, sitting up, and eating a few spoonfuls of applesauce with shaky determination. I helped her, tucking a napkin under her chin. When I told her I had spoken to a lawyer, she closed her eyes for a moment, like the weight of the last 24 hours was finally catching up with her. I am so sorry, sweetheart, she murmured. I made everything harder. I shook my head. No, they did. Not you. Never you. She reached for my hand again. You always try to fix things, even when they are not your fault. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. This is not about fixing. This is about protecting you. And this time, I am not backing down. We sat together quietly for a while. Her breathing steadied. The color returned to her face little by little. At one point, she drifted into a light nap. I watched her chest rise and fall, a soft rhythm, a reminder of how close this had come to ending differently. I thought of the papers she had signed without understanding, of the orange juice on the beach, of my parents' voices on the phone, sharp and unapologetic. And I understood, with a clarity that felt almost clinical, that this was not an isolated mistake. It was the culmination of a pattern that had existed in quieter forms for years. When my grandma stirred again, she whispered that she was tired. I stood, adjusted her blanket, and dimmed the light above her bed. When the room finally settled into soft quiet, I stepped out into the hallway. The air outside was cool as I sank into a chair near the nurse's station, my hands folded in my lap. My thoughts moved in slow, deliberate lines. I was not planning revenge. I was planning protection. Those two things just happened to intersect. And as I sat there watching the corridor stretch ahead, I felt the next steps forming, clear and steady, waiting for me to act. The next steps were forming, clear and steady, waiting for me to act. And by the time the sun rose the following morning, I felt that same stillness inside me. The kind that comes when every excuse finally burns away. My grandma was resting, her fever down enough that the nurse felt comfortable keeping her medicated and monitored. I kissed her forehead, promised I would be right back, and walked out of the hospital with a determination that felt almost clinical. Charleston Police Department sat near the waterfront, a squat brick building that looked like it had been holding its breath since the 1970s. The paint on the windowsills was cracked from salt air. The sidewalk out front tilted slightly toward the street, as if the building itself was tired. Inside, the lobby smelled like old carpet, burnt coffee, and the faint tang of copier toner. A woman at the front desk looked up, her expression alert but not unkind. "Report or request?" she asked. "Report," I said. "Elderly harm. Fraud. Abandonment." Her posture straightened. She took a clipboard from beside her computer and handed it to me as if she had already understood the weight behind the words. "Fill out everything you can. Leave nothing blank if you know it." The row of chairs along the wall sagged in the middle, and when I sat, the cushion released a faint puff of air. A bulletin board hung above me with curling flyers about community meetings, blood drives, neighborhood watches. I started writing. Dates. Written out in full. Locations. Names. The revoked badge. The forged documents. The sedative traces. The abandonment. I included details I had not spoken aloud in years. The way my grandma hesitated when signing forms. How my parents always framed irresponsibility as spontaneity. How their demands had escalated over time. For once, the past did not feel heavy. It felt like evidence. When I returned the clipboard, the receptionist scanned the pages quickly, but not carelessly. She nodded once, firmly, and called someone on an internal line. "Someone will be with you shortly." The officer who appeared 20 minutes later walked with a slight limp, the kind that suggested an old injury rather than age. He introduced himself simply as Officer Brenner and led me to a small interview room that looked like it had been painted beige to discourage emotion of any kind. He opened a notebook and let me talk. No interruptions. No leading questions. His pen moved steadily, a quiet scratching sound underlining my words. When I finished, he closed the notebook gently. "I am forwarding this to our investigations unit. Someone will call you. Expect to hear from them soon." Soon, it turned out to be mid-afternoon. I had stepped into the hallway outside my grandma's hospital room to clear my head, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar Charleston number. "This is Detective Simmons with the Charleston Police Department. I have reviewed your initial report. We are opening a case." A case. The word landed with a quiet finality that traveled through my chest like a slow, steady pulse. Not triumph, not relief. Just the recognition that the truth was finally stepping into a room where it could not be ignored. "We will need to interview your grandmother once she is stable," he continued. "We will need her medical records and copies of any documents she signed recently. Expect communication from me and possibly others. These cases require persistence." "Of course, whatever you need," I said. He paused. "I want to prepare you for something. These cases take time. Families often resist. They minimize. They invent revisions of events that fit what they can emotionally tolerate. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of my dad's monotone dismissal, my mom's entitlement. Neither of them asked once how my grandma was doing. "I am prepared," I said. When I stepped back into my grandma's room, she smiled weakly. Her fever had dropped another degree. Her hair, still damp from the cool cloth the nurse had used earlier, clung softly to her temples. I sat beside her, letting her breathing and the steady hum of the monitor settle my nerves. That peace lasted 10 minutes. My phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then again. When I finally looked, 3 missed calls from my dad, 2 from my mom. Several text messages piling in so quickly the notifications overlapped. My mom: "Stop causing drama. You need to calm down and let adults handle this." Then: "We did nothing wrong. Fix it before things get worse." My dad: "Answer the phone, now. You are making a mistake." Followed by: "The longer you drag this out, the worse it will be for everyone." I stared at the screen as if their words were insects tapping against glass. Familiar tactics. Blame. Minimizing harm. Pressure disguised as concern. I turned the phone face down on the table. My grandma needed rest. She was the only priority in this room. The calls kept coming, every 15 minutes. Then every 10. Once the phone vibrated continuously for almost a full minute. I did not block them. Evidence mattered now. Every message added another layer to the pattern the detective already suspected. My professional life began to intrude around noon. My assistant in Charlotte forwarded an email summary. The international team needed my confirmation on a partnership proposal worth several $1,000,000. A major client wanted to know if our pitch meeting for the following week was still happening. Calendar reminders popped up one after another, like flashing warnings. I typed responses from the hallway, leaning against a wall under a humming fluorescent light. I rescheduled the meeting, delegated 2 deadlines, promised the team I would review the proposal later that night. But the work felt distant, like I was trying to operate a machine through fogged glass. When a colleague called to ask if I could join a virtual meeting the next morning, I hesitated. My grandma's doctor had just recommended keeping her another night for monitoring. My presence mattered. I told him I would try. His silence on the other end told me everything. "You do what you have to do," he said eventually. "We will manage." Around mid-afternoon, Detective Simmons called again. "We have spoken with the security staff at the condo. Your parents were granted access only because your grandmother verbally confirmed they were family. After that, they were allowed unrestricted entry." He paused, letting the words settle. "There is no record of them signing in or out on the day she was abandoned. We are working on enhancing the parking lot footage." I thanked him, even though my stomach had tightened at the confirmation. Hearing the facts from someone else made the betrayal sharper, more defined. When he asked whether my parents were still attempting contact, I told him they had been calling all day. "Good. Do not respond. Save everything." As evening approached, my phone showed nearly 40 missed calls from them combined. Multiple voicemails, dozens of texts. I did not listen. The sound of their voices would only distract me from what mattered, and every attempt they made now was another piece of the story they were unintentionally documenting. A nurse stepped in to check my grandma's vitals. She glanced at my buzzing phone and raised her eyebrows. "Persistent," she said. "Family trouble," I replied. "Something like that," she added with a sympathetic smile. My grandma woke again long enough to sip some broth. Her hands shook slightly, but she insisted on feeding herself. When she settled back against the pillows, she whispered, "You look tired." I told her I was fine. It was half true. I was functioning. But underneath the surface, exhaustion had settled like sediment. The emotional weight of the day. The professional obligations piling. The fear for her. the anger at them. Everything converged into a tight ache behind my eyes. I stepped into the hallway for a moment of quiet. Through a window overlooking the parking lot, the city lights reflected off rows of cars like scattered coins. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and breathed slowly. My phone buzzed again. I let it buzz until it stopped. And in that silence, something settled inside me. This would be long. It would require patience, strategy, and steady resolve. But I was no longer reacting. I was building a case. I was protecting her. And I would see it through. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked toward my grandma's room. The nurse had dimmed the lights. My grandma was already asleep, her breathing even. I pulled the chair close to her bed and sat, letting the quiet of the room surround me. Outside, the night grew deeper. Inside, everything felt still. And while my parents' calls continued flashing across my screen, their panic no longer held any power over me. My focus had narrowed to a single point: protect her. Let the investigation proceed. The rest would unfold, step by step, as steadily as the tide returning to shore. By morning, the quiet resolve I had clung to overnight hardened into something sharper. My grandma was stable enough to move from the shelter's medical unit to a small, temporary care suite the hospital arranged for her while we waited for a longer-term placement. I handled the paperwork, thanked the staff, and helped her settle into the new room. A modest space with pale walls and a view of the parking lot. She said it felt safe. For now, that was enough. I was adjusting her pillows when the knock came. It was not a polite tap. Not a hesitant knock. It was heavy and familiar in a way that pulled every muscle in my back tight. When I opened the door, my dad and mom were standing in the hallway, flanked by the harsh fluorescent lights that made their expressions look even, sharper than usual. My dad spoke first. His voice was a clipped whisper, the kind people use when pretending to be respectful in public spaces. "We need to talk. Now." My mom stood behind him with her arms crossed, her jaw tight, already casting herself in whatever role she thought would get her what she wanted. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me, just enough to block their view of my grandma. Seeing them in that hallway, after everything they had done, made something cold ripple down my spine. They looked like two people who had shown up for a negotiation, not for accountability. My dad started in quickly. "You made a huge mistake going to the police. You should have come to us. We could have worked this out as a family." My mom chimed in before I could respond. "The damage you are doing is unbelievable, Isla. Completely unnecessary. Just call them and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Fix this before it gets worse." Fix this. The same words she used on the phone. As if consequences were something I could sweep aside with a single email. As if my grandmother's condition, the drugs in her system, the abandonment, the theft, could all be cleaned up like spilled sugar on a table. I kept my voice low. "What are you doing here?" My mom tossed her hair back. "We came to see your grandmother. She needs us. We are her family." My dad nodded quickly, adding, "And we need to talk about the condo situation. The paperwork is getting complicated because of your interference. We need your cooperation." There was that word again, need. It was always about need with them. Their need, not anyone else's. "You are not seeing her," I said. My mom blinked like she had misheard me. "Do not be ridiculous. Of course we are. We need to explain things. She is probably confused. Let us in." I moved my body fully in front of the door. "No, you are not going in that room." My dad's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "That is not your decision. She is my mother. You do not get to control access to her." I met his stare with steady calm, the same tone I used in high-stakes contract meetings when someone tried to bulldoze past boundaries. "Actually, that is exactly what I get to do now. You do not get access to her. Ever again." For a moment, neither of them spoke. My mom's mouth fell open slightly, her face going slack with shock. My dad's eyes narrowed, a look I had seen many times as a child when I did not obey fast enough. It had always worked on me before. Not today. My mom found her voice first. "You cannot be serious, Isla. We are doing what is best for everyone. You escalated things by involving strangers. You made this ugly. If you think shutting us out will help anything, you are making a fool of yourself." There it was, the script. Blame, shame, distortion. Delivered flawlessly, almost rehearsed. I felt the anger rise, but instead of boiling hot, it settled low and cold. You drugged her. You made her sign documents she did not understand. You left her alone on a beach with no phone, no money, and no way home. My voice did not waver. I am done pretending this is anything but abuse. My dad stepped closer, towering over me like he used to when I was 12 and afraid of disappointing him. Now I just felt tired. He hissed under his breath. You are exaggerating. She wanted our help. She agreed to sign everything. You travel all over the world and leave her alone for weeks at a time. We were doing you a favor. A favor? I let the word sit in the air. A favor that put her in a hospital bed. My mom reached out and grabbed my arm, her nails digging lightly into my sleeve. Listen to me, she said quietly, her eyes darting toward the closed door as if she might open it. We know you are emotional right now. You are tired, but you need to stop this before the investigation ruins our lives. You can undo this. Just tell the police you overreacted. Tell them you misunderstood. Do what a good daughter would do. Good daughter. I almost laughed right then, a quiet, humorless breath that stayed trapped in my chest. All my life they had used that phrase as a leash. I pulled my arm back. I am a good granddaughter. That is the only title that matters here, and I am done protecting people who hurt her. My dad stepped forward again. Lower your voice. People are watching. He looked over his shoulder as if the hospital staff might take notes. You do not want this to get out of control, he said. You are making a scene. I glanced around the hallway. A few nurses walked past, glancing at us with mild curiosity, but no judgment. The irony almost made me smile. They actually cared more about my grandmother's well-being than the two people who had raised me. This conversation is over, I said. Leave. If you try to get near her, I will call security. My dad scoffed. You cannot keep us from her. You are not a judge. Maybe not, but the actual judge will hear from us today. That stopped him. He blinked, eyes narrowing as if trying to decide whether I had the authority to make that threat. I did. Attorney Gray had already prepared the temporary protective order. All I had to do was sign one more form. My mom's tone shifted instantly, her voice softening into the fragile tremble she used when she wanted sympathy. Isla, please. We are family. You are tearing us apart. Think about what you are doing. She reached for my hand again, and I pulled it back before her fingers touched mine. For years, I had mistaken that tone for love. Now it sounded like a strategy. I shook my head. Do not call me again. Do not come here again. If you try to contact her directly, you will deal with the court. My dad opened his mouth, probably to unleash whatever threat or insult he had been saving, but I did not give him the chance. I stepped back, put my hand on the door, and ended it with a single sentence, spoken quietly, firmly, without anger. You do not get access to her. Ever again. Then I opened the door, slipped inside, and closed it sharply behind me, their voices muffled into silence. Inside, the room was dim. My grandma was asleep, unaware of the storm on the other side of the wall. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle over me like a blanket. My hands were steady, my breathing even. The confrontation had drained something from me, but it had also solidified something else. A line. A boundary. A nurse walked in shortly afterward holding a clipboard. Ms. Benson, she said softly, a bit startled when she saw my expression. Is everything all right? Yes, I said. Everything is fine. It was not fine. Not yet, but something had shifted in my favor. Later that afternoon, Attorney Gray called to tell me the judge had approved the temporary protective order. It was broad and clear. My parents were prohibited from contacting my grandmother directly or indirectly. They were also barred from approaching the hospital or any future residence might occupy. Violating the order would result in immediate legal consequences. I thanked the attorney and hung up. My phone buzzed again. More texts. More missed calls. My dad blamed me for tearing the family apart. My mom rewrote the story to cast herself as the victim. It was like watching two people audition for roles in a play where the script number longer matched the truth. I did not respond. I did not even open half of them. Their words no longer carried weight. When evening came, my grandma woke enough to eat a few spoonfuls of dinner. She smiled when I read her a message from my assistant saying the team was handling things in Charlotte. She worried I was working too much. I told her not to think about it. After she fell asleep again, I stood by the window. The parking lot lights flickered the way they had the night she was found. The air felt thick with a mix of exhaustion and determination. Behind me, my grandma rested. Ahead of me stood a legal battle I had not asked for, but was prepared to face. And somewhere between those two realities, I felt a thin, quiet thread of strength begin to weave itself into something unbreakable. The thin, quiet thread of strength I felt weaving through me did not erase the exhaustion that settled into my bones over the next few days. If anything, the strength made the exhaustion sharper, more clearly defined, like the outline of a cost I had not fully calculated. Doing the right thing was not free. It requires a kind of steady endurance that no one warns you about when you are young and still believe justice runs on clean, straight lines. My grandma was discharged from the hospital after 2 more nights of round-the-clock observation. The doctors wanted her in a safe, supervised environment until her strength returned, and the shelter she had been found in was not an option. Too chaotic. Too many unknown faces, too many opportunities for confusion. I rented a short-term furnished unit in a quiet senior community outside Mount Pleasant, a place with single-floor cottages and a small pond where geese gathered near sunset. It was expensive, painfully expensive, but it was clean and quiet and had 24-hour staff on site. When I signed the contract, the leasing agent smiled at me with the kind of reassurance people sell when they know you are desperate. Moving her in was slow. She got tired easily. I walked her from room to room, showing her the kitchen, the living room, the small patio outside the bedroom window. She ran her fingers over the back of the couch like she was memorizing its texture. When she reached the bedroom, she paused and looked around quietly for a long moment. "It is quiet here," she said. The words were so simple, yet they sank into me with unexpected weight. Quiet was something she had not truly had in years. Not with the constant tension my parents brought into every interaction. Not with the strain she hid so well. Quiet was luxury. Quiet was safe. Quiet was expensive. When I left her that evening, promising to return early the next morning, she held my hand and squeezed gently. "I know this is hard on you. You do not have to do every little thing. Let me manage some of it." Her voice trembled with guilt more than fatigue. I shook my head. "You have already done enough for me in this lifetime. Let me do this part." She smiled, but I could see struggle in her eyes. Pride mixed with gratitude. Gratitude mixed with worry. I drove home to my apartment in Charleston for the first time in nearly a week. The place felt unfamiliar, like someone else's life had been paused there while mine had shifted into something heavier. Stack of unopened mail, plants drooping from neglect. My suitcase is still sitting near the doorway from the night the gate denied me entry. I stepped inside and felt the weight of everything hit me all at once. I sat at my dining table, opened my laptop, and pulled up my bank account. The rental fees, the hospital copays, the legal retainers, the emergency supplies, the ride shares back and forth. The numbers stack themselves into neat little columns of reality, each one a reminder of how fast stability can drain away when you are caring for someone who has been harmed. I earned well. I saved well. I was disciplined. Still, watching the expenses climb triggered an instinctive tightening in my chest. It was not fear exactly. It was my responsibility turning into arithmetic. As I scanned the totals, my email notification chimed with 2 new messages, one from my assistant, one from my team led in Charlotte. I opened the assistant's note first. There were more questions about deadlines, meetings that needed rescheduling, clients asking about my availability. The team lead's email was polite but strained. He needed updates on the international proposal. He needed reassurance that I was still capable of managing my division. He needed me to be someone who was not currently stretched in 12 different emotional directions. I replied with promises I was not entirely sure I could keep. I wrote carefully, balancing honesty with professionalism. My tone was steady. My intention was clear. But when I hit send, A knot of doubt formed in my gut. I had never been late on a contract deliverable in my career. Now I was juggling time between hospital halls, legal consultations, and my grandmother's fragile recovery. Something had to give, and I already knew it would not be her. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the apartment dim except for the faint blue glow from the streetlights outside. I showered quickly and drove to Mount Pleasant with a to-go cup of coffee warming my hands. When I arrived, my grandma was sitting at the small kitchen table sipping tea. Her hair was brushed. Her eyes were clearer. "You look better today," I said, as I set down a bag of groceries. She smiled faintly. "I slept well. It is quiet here." She repeated the phrase almost absent-mindedly. I realized then that quiet had become her benchmark for safety, a measure of peace, a language for healing. I made her scrambled eggs and toast, pretending not to notice how slowly she moved the fork, how carefully she lifted each bite. After breakfast, she wanted to sit outside for a while, so I helped her settle into one of the chairs on the patio. She closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the early morning sun. For a moment, she looked like the woman she had been before everything twisted itself into knots. Watching her breathe in that air softened something in me, but it also sharpened the ache of everything I had lost in the process. My career rhythm, my sense of normalcy, my trust in my family, even my own confidence. Doing the right thing meant sacrificing pieces of yourself in ways that no one applauds. My phone vibrated again. My dad, for the 6th time that morning. I did not answer. The protective order had been served the day before. They were furious, but legally blocked. The messages alternated between guilt, threats, denial, and pleas. My mom wrote long paragraphs about how I had misinterpreted everything, how she was sorry I was too emotional to see the reason, how I had broken the family. I deleted them without reading the majority of the words, but the buzzing did not stop. Neither did the pressure in my chest. By afternoon, I caught myself sitting in my car outside the pharmacy with my forehead resting on the steering wheel. Not crying, not shaking, just drained, depleted in a way that felt bone deep. The cost of doing the right thing was not just financial or logistical, it was psychological. It required a kind of fortitude I had not built intentionally. It required discomfort, isolation, patience. It required letting go of the illusion that family will eventually correct itself if you just wait long enough. I forced myself to sit up. I took a breath. Then another. When I returned to my grandma's cottage with her medication, she greeted me with that soft smile again, a smile that made every sacrifice feel both enormous and worth it. As evening approached, I made her a simple dinner. She ate slowly, then asked if we could watch the sunset from the patio. We sat side by side, wrapped in light sweaters as the sky shifted from blue to gold to pink. The geese honked somewhere across the pond. A couple walked past with their small dog on a leash, nodding politely in that quiet southern way where everyone acknowledges each other, without intruding. My grandma rested her hand on top of mine. "I know this is hard for you," she said. "You are carrying too much." I turned my head slightly, watching her profile against the fading light. "You carried me for years," I said. "This is nothing compared to that." She shook her head softly. "You are a strong woman, Isla, but even strong women need rest. Do not lose yourself while trying to save me." Her words were gentle, but they landed with sharp accuracy. A small truth I had been avoiding. I had not allowed myself a moment to breathe, a moment to acknowledge fear or grief or uncertainty. I was operating like a machine. I looked out over the water, at the ripples catching the last threads of sunlight. She squeezed my hand again. "It is quiet here," she said for the 3rd time that day. And this time, the words did not just describe the cottage or the pond or the sunset. They described peace, safety, a kind of calm that had been missing from her life for far too long. Hearing her say it, I felt something loosen inside me. Maybe the cost was worth it. Maybe silence and distance from the wrong people were their own form of wealth. Maybe quiet was not a luxury, but a necessity. The sun dipped lower, the air cooled. My grandma leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. I watched her breathe, watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest. For the first time since returning from my trip, I let myself inhale fully, slowly, without bracing. Maybe this was what safety looked like. Messy, expensive, exhausting, but real. The sky had already turned deep, even blue, when I walked my grandma back into the cottage that night. She moved slowly, but without fear, and that alone felt like a kind of victory. When she was settled in bed and drifting toward sleep, I stood for a while in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of her breath. It was the most fragile kind of peace, held together not by certainty, but by the simple fact that she was safe. I turned off the light and stepped quietly into the hallway. By the time I reached the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a new message from the investigator. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp, Duval County Courthouse. Bring all originals. It was not unexpected. Still, I felt the air tighten in my lungs. Tomorrow was the day everything would be put on record. No drama, no speeches, just facts. I drove home to my apartment with the windows cracked slightly, letting the cold night air fill the silence that settled around me. My hands stayed steady on the steering wheel. I noticed that. There had been a time when they shook with adrenaline or anger or exhaustion. Now there was only a dull, anchored awareness that the next steps were procedural, almost mechanical. Karma does not yell, I thought. It just arrived. Often quietly. I slept lightly, the way you sleep before an exam or a medical scan, knowing the morning will take something from you even if you are ready. When I woke around 6, the apartment had that early morning stillness where the hum of the refrigerator felt too loud. I dressed in simple black pants and a blazer, nothing theatrical. I wanted to look like what I was. A woman who had come to tell the truth. Before leaving, I called the senior community to check on my grandma. She was eating breakfast, the nurse told me. She asked if she should save you a pastry. The comment softened me for a second. She was thinking ahead. She was imagining normal days again, simple rituals. I said I would stop by after court, even though I did not know how long the process would take. Traffic into downtown moved steadily. Sunlight poured between the tall buildings, hitting the windshield in sharp angles. As I walked into the courthouse, the marble lobby felt colder than I expected. People moved quietly, heads down, clutching folders and briefcases. Court buildings have a way of stripping everyone to their essentials. No one is impressive there. No one is small. Everyone is accountable. The investigation team met me outside courtroom 7. The lead investigator, Detective Warner, nodded in a calm, measured way. He had one of those faces that gave nothing away. A habit I understood. Some professions require stillness. The attorney I had hired, Mark Ellery, arrived moments later, carrying a leather folder packed with documents. He had a presence that made people lower their voices. It was not intimidation. It was clear. When the bailiff opened the doors, the three of us stepped inside. The judge assigned to our petition was a woman in her 60s, glasses perched low on her nose, the kind of judge who had probably heard every excuse imaginable. I sat at the left table, Mark beside me. My parents sat across the aisle. Seeing them in that fluorescent light hit differently. They looked smaller than they had sounded on the phone during their fury. My dad stared at the table. My mom blinked rapidly, her lips tight like she was bracing for a medical procedure. Their attorney leaned toward them, whispering something neither of them seemed to absorb. The judge began. She spoke concisely, no wasted language. First, she reviewed the petition I had filed, a motion to void the power of attorney, a request for guardianship oversight, a complaint regarding suspected elder financial abuse and neglect. The words sounded clinical, spilling across the courtroom microphones, but the weight beneath them was anything but. Mark stood and presented the documents, the forged signature, the medical records showing the sedative traces, the security logs from the condo, the report from the officer who found my grandmother wandering disoriented near the bus terminal. The judge read each page slowly. She looked at me once, her eyes steady and direct. Not warm, not cold, just seeing. My parents' attorney argued next. His voice carried that familiar rhythm of someone trying to shape a narrative into something gentler. Misunderstandings, family disagreements, confusion. He used the phrase, "no malicious intent," twice in under 2 minutes. When he finished, my mom raised her hand slightly, asking to speak. The judge allowed it. My mom's voice was thin, shaky. She kept her eyes on the table. She said she never meant harm. She said she thought my grandma wanted help with the paperwork. She said she panicked at the beach. Nearly every sentence started with something I never thought. Not once did she say, "I am sorry for what we did." Not once did she mention my grandma's fear, or her illness, or the fact that she abandoned a 79-year-old woman with no identification, or money. My dad did not speak at all. When it was my turn, I stood, though my knees felt strangely hollow. I did not raise my voice. I did not embellish. I simply stated what had happened, in order, as clearly as I could. The condo access, the hospital, the sedatives, the missing phone, the forged forms, the abandonment. My voice stayed level. I noted that, too. Calm has a way of sounding unforgiving when laid beside cruelty. When I finished, the judge asked me one question. "Do you believe your grandmother is safe in the presence of either of your parents?" The answer rose without hesitation. "No, she is not." The judge nodded once, wrote something on the file in front of her, and began her ruling. The power of attorney was declared invalid. The transfer of authority was void. A temporary guardianship order was granted to me, pending full review. Restrictions were placed on any contact my parents could attempt, both in person and electronic. A protective barrier settled into place. Not with drama, but with protocol. Regarding the sale of the condo, the judge paused. Her tone shifted slightly as she explained that the civil proceedings surrounding fraudulent sales would continue under separate legal channels. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. What mattered today was safety. My mom let out a faint sound, not quite a cry, not quite a gasp. My dad remained motionless, shoulders slumped. Their attorney touched their arms lightly, a gesture that seemed more perfunctory than comforting. The judge concluded with a single line that stayed with me long after the audio in. The courtroom faded. Harm does not need to be loud to be real. Then she dismissed us. When we stepped into the hallway, I felt neither triumph nor relief, just the slow exhale of something unclenching after too long. Mark asked if I needed anything else from him that day. I told him no, thanked him, and watched him disappear into the elevator. My parents hovered a few yards away, not approaching, not leaving. My mom looked at me with something I could not immediately interpret. Not anger, not regret, something closer to disbelief. Like she still expected me to fold in the last minute the way I had so many times before. But that era was over. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. My dad would not meet my eyes. I walked past them without stopping. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright after the courthouse's dim interior. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the warmth hit my face. My phone buzzed. A message from the nurse at the senior community. "Your grandmother is having lunch and asked if you might come by later." I smiled faintly. Even in the middle of legal storms, life kept its gentle rhythm. I drove straight to her cottage. When I walked in, she was sitting at the small table with a bowl of soup. She looked up, studying my face quietly. "It went fine," I said. She nodded as if she already knew. We spent the afternoon in her living room, talking about everything except court. She asked about my work. She asked if I had eaten. She asked if I thought the hydrangeas in the front yard were too crowded, and maybe needed thinning. Each question was an act of grounding, a way of reminding both of us that our lives were more than legal documents and betrayals. Later, when she took a nap, I stepped onto the patio. The pond rippled under a gentle breeze. A few leaves skated across the surface. It struck me then how quiet victory can be. No fireworks, no applause, just the absence of threat. The restoration of safety. The knowledge that someone you love is no longer within reach of harm. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail from my mom, though I did not open it. Whatever she had to say could wait. The law had spoken. Boundaries were in place. Karma had not shouted. It had walked in through the front door with a clipboard and a clear set of instructions. As the sun began to lower behind the trees, I let my shoulders drop. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like stability threading itself back into my spine. The cottage was quiet. My grandma was safe, and the consequences were unfolding exactly as they needed to. I stayed there until the sky shifted into the darker shades that signal evening. Then I stepped back inside, closed the patio door gently, and let the quiet settle around us again. I closed the patio door behind me, and the cottage settled into its evening hush, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than accidental. My grandma was still asleep, her breathing steady through the cracked bedroom door. And for a moment, I just stood there in the dim light, letting the calm settle into my bones. The day had been long, heavy in places, strangely light in others. But it was done. What came next would not be dramatic or loud. It would be a choice. Mine. 2 mornings later, I drove to my attorney's office. It was warm for late spring, the kind of warmth that makes the air feel thick even before noon. The office sat on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, the elevator moving with that slow, mechanical sigh older buildings tend to have. When the doors opened, Mark was already waiting near the reception desk, holding a manila file and a cup of coffee he did not offer because he knew I was particular about flavor and temperature. Small things like that make the world feel more manageable. We stepped into his conference room. The blinds were half closed, sunlight striping the table in narrow bars. He gestured for me to sit, then placed the folder in front of me without theatrics. The tone in his voice suggested he had sorted through every possible angle already, and this was simply the next step. "We have an update on the civil track," he said. "The judge's ruling opened the door for us to contest the sale." The title company responded quickly. They are not fighting the reversal. They want a clean exit. My fingers rested lightly on the folder, not opening it. I could already feel what was coming. Mark continued, tapping the edge of the folder with a quiet precision. "The condo can be restored to your grandmother's name. It is a straightforward administrative correction now. No delays. No additional hearings. You have the legal right to take it back." The words sat between us, neat and orderly. A return to the original state. A home restored. A symbolic victory wrapped in paperwork. But the image that rose in my mind was not the condo with its sea view, the balcony where my grandma liked to sit in the mornings, or the kitchen she organized with almost ceremonial care. What I saw instead was that security gate denying my access, the empty space where she should have been, the beach where they left her, the hollow look in her eyes when I found her. Places remember things, not literally, but enough that we do. Enough that walking into them reanimates what happened there. I opened the folder finally, scanning the pages. The legal language was cold and detached in the way only legal documents can be. But beneath it was the offer to rewind the world a few months, to pretend none of it had happened. Mark watched my face, waiting. He was too experienced to push, too professional to assume. I set the paper down. "I do not want it back." He blinked once, almost imperceptibly. "You are certain?" I nodded. "Yes. My grandma is not going back there, and I am not either." He did not argue. Instead, he asked the only follow-up that mattered. "Do you want me to finalize the refusal on your behalf?" "Yes." He wrote a short note on his pad. The scratch of the pen sounded louder than it should have. When he looked back up, his voice softened in that careful way attorneys sometimes use when approaching emotional terrain. "It is a valuable property, Isla. There is no judgment in reclaiming what was yours." "I know." I said it quietly, not out of hesitation, but clarity. "It is not my home. Not anymore. And it never truly belonged to me in the first place. It belonged to a version of trust that does not exist now." Mark nodded, accepting the decision without interpretation. We went over a few more administrative steps, signatures, the sequence of filings he would complete. When we finished, I stood and felt something in my chest loosen. It was not freedom exactly, but it was direction. On the drive to the senior community, the sun climbed higher, lighting the tops of the magnolia trees along the road. I rolled the window down an inch and breathed in air that smelled faintly like warm earth and early summer. My grandma was in the lounge when I arrived, sitting near the window where the afternoon light pooled across the table. She was sorting through a small stack of recipe cards she had kept for years. Some were written in her handwriting, soft and looping, others copied from magazines long out of print. When she saw me, her face brightened in that calm, steady way she always had. "Good day," she said as I sat beside her. "Yes, productive. How are you feeling?" "Better. The air here is easier. It was such a simple sentence, but it held something rare. She had not said anything sentimental or grand. Just the truth of her comfort. I could feel the contrast then, between this light-filled room and this space where she had lived before, the place she had trusted, the place that betrayed her safety. We talked for a while, the kind of unhurried conversation that drifts from topic to topic like a leaf on a pond. She showed me a card for a peach cobbler recipe and laughed when she remembered she had never once followed the measurements correctly. The sound was gentle but steady. It told me more about her healing than any medical chart could. She asked eventually about the court, not in a pressing way, just curious. I told her the truth, uncluttered. The condo can be put back in your name, I said, but I told them no. We are not going back there. She looked at me for a long moment, searching my face without judgment. Then she nodded, a small decisive tilt of her chin. Good. There are too many ghosts in that place now. I exhaled slowly, the breath leaving my chest in an even stream. There it was. Confirmation without explanation. Permission without wait. Later, we walked the small garden path behind the building. Her steps were careful but steady, the sun warming her shoulders. Flowers were just starting to bloom, small bursts of color against the green hedges. We did not talk much. We did not need to. The quiet around us was easy, unforced. On the far end of the path, there was a bench that faced a narrow strip of water. Not the ocean, not a grand view, just a peaceful inlet where the light shifted gently across the surface. She sat first. I joined her. For a while, she watched the ripples moving across the water. Then she said, almost like a sigh drifting into the warm air, "This is enough." It was not dramatic. It was not poetic. But it was exactly right. A declaration that peace does not need scenery. Safety does not need a price tag. Healing does not require restoration of property, only restoration of dignity. We sat there until the breeze cooled, until the shadows stretched long across the path. My phone buzzed once with a voicemail from my dad. I did not check it. I did not plan to. Some choices are loud. Some are violent in their clarity. This one was neither. It was gentle and absolute. I stood, offering my hand to help her up. She took it, her grip warm against mine, and we walked slowly back toward the building, letting the evening fold around us like a soft, closing curtain. Peace, I realized, is not something you win. It is something you choose. And that day, for the first time in a long time, I chose it without hesitation. I helped my grandma climb the last few steps to the overlook, my hand hovering near her elbow even though she barely needed the help anymore. The wooden railing was warm beneath her palm from the midday sun. A soft wind pushed up from the shoreline, carrying that mineral scent that had framed so many summers of my childhood. Back then, everything felt permanent. Now permanence was something I no longer believed in. But peace still felt possible, maybe even deserved. We were far from Jacksonville now, living in a quiet town along the Georgia coast where the water moved at its own patient pace. Here, the days folded into one another with a kind of gentle reliability I had never realized I needed. A few gulls circled overhead, too lazy to call out, drifting in the steady wind as if the air itself was holding everything in place. The sky stretched wide and clean, like a page no one had written on yet. Nearly a year had passed since the court issued the permanent protective order. It had come stamped on crisp white paper, but the boundary it created felt deeper than ink. My parents had not contacted me directly since, though people in our extended orbit occasionally hinted that they were still trying to tell their version of events. Once, a letter arrived at my attorney's office addressed to me. Mark intercepted it, sealed it in a folder labeled "Do Not Respond," and asked if I wanted to know what it said. I told him no. Some truths gain their meaning by what we choose not to invite back into our lives. My grandma adjusted her cardigan as she looked out over the water. The ocean sat farther from us here, glimpsed through breaks in the dunes, rather than right below our feet. I noticed she seemed to prefer the distance. A view you walked toward, not one you were forced to confront. A horizon that asked for nothing except your company. "How is your breathing?" I asked softly. "Better," she said. "The air here is honest." That phrasing made something warm rise in my chest. She did not speak in metaphors, not usually, but that one landed exactly right. Honest air, a place where nothing pressed too hard or looked back at her with reminders she never asked for. Her doctors still marveled at her improvement. Physical therapy had become a routine she almost enjoyed. Her independence had returned in ways none of us dared predict during that first terrible week. Her memory had sharpened again too, though certain fragments from that night on the beach remained blurred, maybe mercifully so. We walked slowly along the sandy path. The boards of the boardwalk creaked under our weight as we settled onto a wooden bench facing the water. I brushed a few pine needles off the seat before she sat. She tilted her face toward the breeze and closed her eyes, and I watched as the tension in her shoulders eased inch by inch. I sat beside her and let the quiet press against us, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than accidental. A year earlier, I had stood on a very different shore. I had held her up as she trembled with fever, her mind drifting in and out, her body still carrying traces of the sedative they gave her. I remembered the beeping of the hospital monitors, rhythmic and steady, the only predictable sound in that moment. And I remembered the weight of her hand clutching mine as if I were the only stable point in her world. I remembered calling my parents, expecting panic or fear or even shame. Instead, I heard that sentence spoken in a tone that was casual to the point of cruelty. It is our inheritance anyway. We are just taking it early. A sentence that did not wound me immediately. It hollowed me. Certain truths do not shatter. They erode. And once erosion begins, there is no unlearning what you now know. Watching her breathe calmly beside me now, that memory felt like a coastline I had once washed up on and then walked away from. Not erased, just uninhabited. My grandma opened her eyes again, pale blue catching the sunlight. "We should plant something on the porch this spring," she said. "Maybe rosemary. It keeps its scent even in the heat." I smiled and pictured it instantly. Clay pots arranged neatly, her hands tucked in the soil. A little herb garden meant not for survival, but pleasure. "I think that would be perfect," I said. She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and looked back toward the horizon. The water shimmered in wide ribbons of silver and blue. No concrete towers blocking the light. No gated entrances. No access badges revoked without warning. Just open space and a steady tide rolling in. Just room to breathe. She whispered the words more than said them. This is enough. The simplicity of it hit harder than any declaration. The phrase slid into me like a final puzzle piece I did not realize I was still holding. Closure, people say, can feel like victory, but sometimes it feels like choosing to stop walking back into rooms where you were never meant to stay. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is refusing to revisit what nearly broke you. We sat there for a long time, letting the sounds of the waves fill the silence. Several gulls called out from the beach below. A few families unpacked coolers near the shore, their voices drifting up in soft bursts that felt almost musical. My grandma leaned her head against my shoulder. I wrapped an arm around her and felt something inside me unwind, slow and steady. Eventually, she lifted her head. "I am ready to go back," she said. I helped her stand. Her hand was warm in mine, her posture steady. We walked the path toward the cottage. The sunlight filtered through tall seagrass, catching in the edges of her hair. Her steps were careful but sure. Mine matched hers without thinking. There was no triumphant swell in my chest, no cinematic feeling of resolution, just a quiet loosening, a subtle release of pressure I had been carrying for months. Survival did not look like fighting. It looked like this. Two people walking home without fear. No apologies from the people who caused the damage. No explanation. And no need for either. We had stepped out of their orbit. That was enough. When we reached the porch, she paused and looked at the empty clay pots lined near the railing. They were clean, waiting. "I will pick up rosemary next week," I said. She smiled, small but certain. "Yes. Let us start with that." Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of the candle she liked, something with eucalyptus and sea salt. I helped her into her favorite chair, the one with a soft blanket draped across the back, and opened the windows to let the ocean breeze drift in. She closed her eyes and exhaled. I had not seen her look this peaceful in years, maybe ever. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her, not out of fear or vigilance, the way I had in the hospital. This was different. This was gratitude. Gratitude that she had survived. Gratitude that the law had listened. Gratitude that we had moved to a place where the past could not reach us without a court escort. She was safe. I was steady. The damage was real, but it no longer defined the shape of our days. And the path ahead, though imperfect, felt open. Before I go any further, if you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power. Truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from. I leaned lightly against the doorway and let the soft sound of the sea move through the room. No dramatic flourish, no triumphant ending, just the steady rhythm of water and wind doing their work without asking permission. It was quiet. It was ordinary. It was enough.